2019, and I run a campaign called Invest for Change, which is kind of looking at what universities can do after they've divested, and kind of where they can go from there, which hopefully we'll talk a bit about later.
Thanks, Melanie. Also, just to say, I forgot to mention at the beginning, but we are recording this event. So if you are uncomfortable with your face being in the recording, just turn off your camera or keep your camera off. But yeah, I'll hand over to Addie next to introduce herself.
Hi everyone, thanks for inviting me to take part today. I'm Ellie Harrison. I'm a lecturer at Dundee University, and I've been trying to put pressure on the university to divest for about 5 or 6 years, and we finally got them to commit to it last year. So we're here to offer some tips, hopefully.
Thanks, Ellie. Imogen?
Hello, I'm Imogen. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the campaigns officer for the Green Party Society here at Warwick. So the reason I'm here is because our campaign for this year is divestment from corporate finance. So yeah, just trying to pressure the university in any way possible. Lots of emails and lots of technical stuff, but it's really exciting. And so yeah, I can't wait to talk about it more later on.
Thanks, Imogen. Alex?
Hello, so I am the president of Climate Reality Warwick, an activist society here in Warwick, and we are very excited to be taking part in this panel today. We had suggested actually the motion to remove Barclays from campus last term. Unfortunately, it failed, but we believe that the divestment motion passed from the environmental officers is really important. So we are happy that we're still talking about it, and we will definitely continue. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Hamza?
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Hamza. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a master's student at Warwick, and I also organise with a Apartheid Off Campus, which is a student-led movement focusing on divestments from Israeli apartheid, and also I organise with FOP as well.
Thanks, Hamza. And then last but not least, Asma.
Hi, my name is Asma. My pronouns are she, her. I'm also a first year at Warwick, and I'm active in Friends of Palestine, and I'm also involved in campaigning against complicity with Israeli apartheid.
Thanks, everyone. Before we dive into some of the panel questions, Kimmy and I wanted to talk a little bit on divest and divest at Warwick. Kimmy and I are the environment and ethics officers in the Students' Union this year. And in November, we passed a Warwick divest motion through ASV, which passed with, I think, about 1,700 votes, but it's still yet to be ratified. So I'll just pass over to Kimmy to give a brief overview of what happened and what's happening there.
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the main parts of our manifesto was to pass the divest motion, and specifically the wording was to some people quite controversial because we explicitly stated that we wanted the university to divest from companies complicit in Palestinian human rights abuses and also complicity from apartheid. And we got a legal challenge from UK Lawyers for Israel, who also, they didn't like the wording of the motion. And we've been in a legal battle with these lawyers, our own SUM board, which haven't really been supporting us at all. Yeah, we're still kind of trying to get this motion ratified right now. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary. If you wanted to add anything as well.
No, I think that summarizes it perfectly. It's just obviously we're 5 months on from when that motion passed and it's still not been ratified. So it's an ongoing battle, which is why this panel is so important to talk about divestment and why divestment is important. But yeah, on that vein, the first question that we have is directed towards Hamza and Asma, and it's where is our money? What is Warwick invested in at the moment that we can see? So we have slides as well. Actually, let me just share a screen and do that now. Oh, okay. Hamza and Asma, do you wanna start?
Yeah. Asma, do you want to start first, or?
Yeah, I'll just introduce like what this presentation is going to be. We're just going to try to give a summary of our research into work investments. And we just want to highlight that we've done this research work in collaboration with Friends of Palestine at Warwick, but also with Apartheid Off Campus, which is a great grassroots network of student activists who are calling on their universities to cut ties with Israeli apartheid. And yeah, you should all definitely try following them on Instagram and Twitter. Yeah, I'll hand over to Hamza, who will hopefully get us started.
Yeah, sorry, can we move to the next slide? Okay, thank you. So yeah, well, over the summer, just like quick overview, over the summer, activists from Apartheid Off Campus submitted an FOI, which is a Freedom of Information. Essentially, at the start, it was like a national campaign just to investigate university complicity in Israeli apartheid. So we sent it out through numerous universities and institutions. But obviously, I was just trying to focus on Warwick. Initially, they rejected it on the basis that it was not in the public interest to disclose the investment portfolio. However, we worked alongside a few members of different organizations to look into the Rathbones Investment Group, who managed Warwick's endowment fund. And the endowment size is 25.5 million. So there's a lot of money that Warwick is hiding from us, essentially, and are purposely not being transparent with their investment. So I guess what we found was quite shocking, yet not surprising, as this is an indictment of our academic institution. But before I guess we kind of highlight what we found, it's important to note that Warwick does have a socially responsible investment policy. And so what they try to do is market themselves as an ethical institution that cares for human rights and the climate change, when in fact this is of course blatant greenwashing. So they couldn't really give a shit about environmental degradation, armament sales to military regimes, or even Palestinian human rights. But I'll pass it forward to Asma to explain a bit more about what we found.
Hi, yeah. So these are just like to name a few of the unethical companies that Warwick is invested in. The list is like so much bigger than that, but these are just some of the worst ones. You've got fossil fuel companies including BP, Shell, Chevron, Glencore, Canadian National Resources. And the most ironic part of all of this is at the first point on the SRI policy, which we just showed in the last slide. It was saying that they weren't going to invest in environmental degradation, but the biggest portion of their investments is in fossil fuels. So we know about the BP oil spill, we know about the effect of pipelines installed by companies like Canadian National Resources on Indigenous land and communities in Canada and North America. And you've also, of course, got companies complicit in the border regime, surveillance technology companies like G4S and Cisco. And there's tons of weapons and arms companies like BAE Systems, Boeing, and Babcock. And we have like a full breakdown of the number of investments in the next slide. But no, you can go back. Still not. Yeah. And of course, none of these industries are separate from one another. The weapon companies are also, of course, complicit in climate change. We know that the US military is one of the largest polluters in the history of the planet. It pollutes more than 140 other countries combined. So obviously, unless our environmentalism and our call for divestment is also anti-wars and anti-arms and anti-US imperialism, then we're not actually going to be saving the planet from climate change. And vice versa as well. We know that companies like BP and Shell, which accelerate climate change, they also fuel war and imperialism in the Middle East. And what we found is that Warwick sits comfortably in the middle of all of that. It's also complicit in unethical labor. It has a whole building in the science park dedicated to Jaguar Land Rover, which uses oil labor, and they're also invested in sweatshops and tobacco. And I think like a crucial point to make is that Warwick doesn't actually actively choose to invest in any of these companies. As we mentioned earlier, its entire endowment is managed externally by this Rathbones company. So it's not invested in protecting the environment or in destroying it. Its only objective is profit, and that's why all the investments are chosen by like expert investment people. So its only objective is profit, because it kind of, I think that like exposes the entire problem of running an educational institution like a corporation, because you end up carrying out like so much research and research into the adverse effects of climate change, but then it also safekeeps the violent BP archives within the same campus. Yeah, you can move on to the next slide.
So as I kind of like mentioned, and as Asma kind of mentioned, a lot of this research was based on looking at companies that are invested in Israeli apartheid, and just to see whether or not Warwick has some sort of link. And we did find a huge list of companies that Warwick are currently indirectly funding or investing in. So currently Warwick invests in 39 corporations that are complicit in Israeli apartheid, and the total number is £255,983. Of course, this is not taking in consideration of sweatshops, tobacco industries, and of course the likes of BP and Shell. This is just focusing on companies that are complicit in Israeli apartheid. And also, just to highlight a few, for example, BAE Systems is the UK's largest arms and military company and the largest defense contractor in Europe. Actually, in fact, I think WMG have links with BAE System. And also, I think WMG did fund a whole module on cybersecurity with BAE System. So it kind of highlights how insidious other institutions and other university is. But yeah, in 2011, BAE Systems worked to produce and market Protector naval drone, which Israel uses to maintain siege on Gaza. They also provide heads-up display systems for target selection in F-16 jets, which were regularly used during the 2014 bombing of Gaza. Also, in 2014, Rolls-Royce were granted export licenses for engines for military aircrafts to Israel, and in March 2016, they signed an agreement deal with Israel to supply new engines for the Israeli aircrafts. So I guess, as you can see, Warwick loves violating Palestinian human rights as it actively invests in the ongoing settler colonial project. It will continue to market itself as an ethical, caring institution, but yet will subjugate Palestinian lives to ongoing oppression. So if you want to know where your money is going as a Warwick student, it's going towards slaughtering and dispossessing Palestinian lives. But can we just move on to the next slide as well?
Yeah, we also wanted to make this really important point, is that it's not just direct investments that we need to be paying attention to. The university receives tens of millions of pounds in research grants from these same companies, and in return it carries out years of research and manufacturing of violent technology for them. And this is largely because, especially at Warwick, I think we treat science as objective truth that is immune to politics and corruption, and we don't question what context this science arises from and where it will be applied. And yeah, these are like the three companies that have like the biggest research partnerships with Warwick, and it adds up to around like £29 million, but there's so much more than this if you look at all the other complicit industries, but this is just focused on Israeli apartheid. And yeah, if you please move on to the next slide. I think this guides us nicely into like what implications that all of this information has for our organizing. I think like the take-home message of all of this is that we have to remember that the violent investment list is not the root of the problem. It's simply a symptom of the problem of our marketized education and our marketized university. So our complicity with the climate crisis goes way beyond the investments. And I mentioned this on Monday, but I just want to reiterate that we need to understand that these universities are built on racist, white supremacist foundations. They're built on colonial science and exclusive forms of knowledge that have gone hand in hand for centuries with projects of colonialism and extraction that have pillaged the earth and resulted in the climate crisis that we speak of. So our universities have provided and continue to provide the science that is needed to exploit nature and humans in this way. So we're definitely not here, we're not saying that if the university divests, then all the problems are solved and that we've done our part in mitigating the climate crisis. We're just saying that like exposing this financial history allows us to kind of see exactly where the university's priorities lie, and it helps us like organize in solidarity with other struggles on campus. Yeah, also we need to understand that like it's complicit on every level, not just investments, but also partnerships, career fairs where they literally welcome these companies with open arms and sell their students' employability to them. Even its pedagogy and the type of knowledge that it reproduces, values, and promotes, everything is complicit.
Yeah, and just to add to that as well, it's important that we unite different struggles on campus, and we need to extend an active reach out to other communities, as we can no longer fight systems of oppression through isolated campaigning. So the demand for a liberated Palestine requires us to take a collective stance against all forms of oppression and multitude ways that they manifest and connect. So we cannot be anti-racist without being anti-capitalist. And this includes resisting the ongoing marketization, as Usma mentioned, of higher education. And we have seen that the university will greenwash themselves to seem like there are some sort of ethical institutions. So we need to understand these intersections to fight for a transformative change. And regarding decolonization is not a metaphor. It's important that we actually understand how Warwick uses the term decolonization to kind of like, it's kind of like a buzzword for them. For them, it's more about, I guess, integrating or interrogating his department, adding more black and brown faces to the curriculum. Whilst of course it's important that that happens, but what's more important is that decolonization is about a commitment in ending the material and institutional complicity with complicit companies or with Israeli apartheid, as well as other forms of oppression, i.e. climate change. And this would be an important step towards an anti-racist future. But of course, it shouldn't just stop there. What good is an institution when its pedagogy is ableist and is catered towards a privileged group? What good is an institution when there's an academic awarding gap? What good is an institution when there are parts of the campus that are literally named after a colonialist? What good is an institution when there is mass redundancies and staff were being underpaid, overworked, and outsourced? So yes, ending the material complicity is vital, but it should not just stop there. It requires to continue to work for a transformative space where learning is a form of transformation, and that these spaces are places where students can heal and learn and thrive. And it's also decolonization is about dreaming of a future free from violence in the forms of capitalism and white supremacy. It is also about building and developing a world that is a complete alternative to what it currently looks like. And I think the root of this is to properly challenge the marketized education, understand that the money invested can be used to create anti-racist pedagogical practices built on revolutionary ideas, and putting money into proper services that help us heal and learn. And yeah, that is the end of us.
Thank you so much, guys. That was so informative. And I think you make a really good point about how it's not just investments, like it's not just about divesting, it's about building or critically interrogating our university as well. So thank you so much for that. Did anybody else want to, I don't think actually anybody else can answer that question because Hamza and Asma did the work of investigating where our money is going. So I'll move on to the second question, and this is posed towards climate reality and Green Party society. Why is divestment important?
Hello, so I'll be speaking on behalf of Climate Reality. My name is Alex. I'd like to start by thanking Hamza and Asma for basically your commitment to this campaign. It's really important, and my approach is more centered on climate change, but still it's important to understand why divestment is that important. So I'd first like to start with a short history of divestment and so what it is exactly. So I think we'll understand that it is the opposite of investment. So basically the removal of investment capital, and it's mainly aimed towards institutions. Now, these institutions can be religious institutions, they could be charitable foundations, or as in our case, they can be universities. So a divestment campaign is actually not something that new. Now it's something that we see, I think, mostly for the environment, or as we have seen with Palestine, the violation of human rights. But it actually stems from the 20th century, and it's connected to the South African apartheid. And it is believed that it had a very important role in fighting against apartheid, and it was even enacted as legislation in the US in 1986. Apart from that, there were divestment campaigns against the tobacco industry, against companies that funded violence in Darfur, and what I'm going to focus on is fossil fuel divestment. So fossil fuel divestment has actually been a campaign that has been particularly active after 2010. It has turned into a global movement, and it basically asks institutions to move their money out of oil, out of coal, out of gas companies for both moral as well as financial reasons. Some examples of like institutions that have actually divested include the Church of England to some extent, and Glasgow University was the first one to commit to divestment back in 2014. It's also interesting to note that there are nearly 10 billion pounds worth of investments that were done last year, and they were directed towards big oil and gas companies such as BP and Shell. And it's interesting to see that even councils that have declared a climate emergency, including those in the West Midlands, continue to have like big investments in fossil fuels in the UK. But I read just yesterday actually in the news about how HSBC, which is like a major bank and investor in fossil fuels, is actually currently having like in the next general meeting, they will have a vote and they will vote on plans to phase out coal financing by 2040. It's believed that the people's support for divestment in that case was really important, and the leading activist announced that it shows that like the shareholder engagement can deliver concrete results. So I thought maybe that gives more hope about what we can do here in the university. But an alarming point is how actually many of the companies that I saw that are talking about divestment are saying that they want to align their investment strategies with the Paris Agreement timescale, but no company is willing to announce on its own what it wants to do. They are just waiting for the other companies, it seems, to announce what they can do so they can give the minimum effort. So I want to highlight how important collective effort, goodwill, and cooperation is in general to actually manage to avert the climate catastrophe that is awaiting. And I have some articles that I would like to share on the chat in case anyone is interested and would like to read more after the presentation. And I want to give the floor to Imogen now to talk about their campaign with Green Party Society.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Alex, for that really informative speech. A lot of stuff there that I've not even known. So yeah, that was really great. And also thank you to Hamza and Asma for their speech as well, because yeah, it just goes to show how even though Warwick present this front, that they have their social investment policy and they're doing what they can, it just goes to show how much is still going on behind the scenes. So yeah, my name is Imogen. I am the campaigns officer for the Green Party Society, as I mentioned earlier, and our campaign for this year is divestment from corporate financing, mainly directed to the fossil fuel industry, but of course all of the implications that arise when we do talk about divestment. So yeah, basically our main campaign is putting pressure on the university to release all their investments, ensure full transparency, and to divest from industries with harmful ties, and especially to the fossil fuel industry. So we adopted this campaign last year, as it's currently in the workings of becoming a nationwide Young Greens campaign, and hopefully that means we can be directing it at universities all across the nation and ensuring that it is a much larger scale campaign, because that is what it really needs to be. So the main thing that drew me to this was that when we first started on this campaign, I wanted to read more into what Warwick did in 2015 to divest from more fossil fuels. I was like, wait, what exactly is this? So I searched up and it just took me to their regular press releases page with no information at all about what they had decided to do, what their commitments were, what their plan was for the future. It was very much just like a statement, and that was it. And that is not what divestment is. It's so much more than that. It's a continual process. So that's the main thing that really shocked me. I was like, well, obviously they're not doing what they need to be doing if they're just putting a press release, and that's the extent of their campaigning. So yeah, as the Greens, we've been doing a few bits such like scouring Warwick's websites and emailing people for more information and clarification on what the university's doing. But at the forefront, there really is nothing there, and it's so difficult to kind of get any information exactly on what the university is doing. One thing that we're focusing on is emailing the investment subcommittee and trying to get them to consider environmental and ethical impacts when investing and have that placed in their terms of reference, so that they are forced to consider that when looking at new investments. But the email was very vague, and I don't know how willing they are to comply to that. But that is definitely something that can be done, is pressuring them to consider all environmental and ethical impacts when they are investing and have that actually right in the terms of reference. They have no choice but to do so. So this campaign is crucial to adopting a sustainable campus, as Hamza and Asma were talking about, and also mainly to do with how we are in a marketized education system. Universities are forced to look for funding from certain sectors to increase their financial return. And we need to be adopting an anti-capitalist stance when looking at divestment and looking at the implications on the environment, especially. Warwick should not be using their money that we pay for an education to invest in unethical and environmentally dangerous industries, and we should be consulted on these matters. There is also a distinction that needs to be made between direct and indirect investments, because it's one thing to say that we are against all direct investments in these sectors, but it's so much more than that. We need to be looking at the indirect investments too, because this is where the majority of the power that university still holds lies. So the ethical investment policy is completely redundant unless we ensure that students are consulted. There is easy access to all their investments, and there is a complete commitment from Warwick to work with us on this topic. So for the Greens, investment in ethical industries is an easy way for Warwick to secure from funding that it's not so known about, and it's not such an obvious topic that people are going to be discussing. And that's why it's such an important topic that we need to be discussing, and that's why this event is so crucial in raising awareness for this. It's very easy to brush over this topic and for it not to be considered as a vital step in the environmental campaign, especially given the impending climate crisis. It's very easy to say this is not an important part because it's so indirect, but it's also so crucial. And it just shows how this is such an important area that we need to be putting all of our pressure and energy on to adopt a much more sustainable campus. So as I mentioned, divestment is so much more than just a statement. It needs to be a continual process that allows the university to become a lot more accountable for their actions and ensure that the goals and statements they have made are stuck to, and that they are working with students to ensure that we are consulted on where our money is going. Thank you.
Thanks, Imogen and Alex. And yeah, that's such an important angle of student representation. It was one of the things that Kimmy and I actually included in the divest motion, that things like the investment subcommittee should have student and staff representation on. And I think as well, like the narrative on campus a lot is, well, Warwick announced that they had divested in 2015 and they have this socially responsible investment policy. I mean, me and Kimmy have heard those kind of arguments and pushback from within the SU without really understanding or without really interrogating where the money actually is, like doing the work that Asma and Hamza has done. Even when me and Kimmy were writing the motion, we heard from a staff member that the pension fund, the direct investments that Warwick has in the pension fund have not been divested from fossil fuels. So Warwick University is deeply complicit, and it is an ongoing process. And yeah, so yeah, thank you so much, Alex and Imogen. Did anybody else want to answer around that question on why divestment is important? Otherwise, we can move on to the next one. No? Okay. The next question is, how do we pressure our university to divest? And this question is directed towards Dundee University to answer. One of the students involved in the divestment campaign at Dundee University, Hannah, she was unable to make the panel today, but she very kindly sent in a video, which I will now play if I can screen share again. And then I will pass over to Ellie to speak more about the to speak more about divestment at Dundee.
So I don't think it's working for me. Is it working for anyone else? Okay.
Is it not working?
No. Do you want to like try? Sometimes it does that. Do you want to like try again?
Yeah, sure. 1 second. Is it the sound?
It's the screen as well. We can't see.
Oh, sorry, guys. Okay. Can you see it now?
No. I can try share.
Yes, please. Oh, wait, 1 second. I think I know why. Is that connect? Can people see that?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Okay. And can people wait? Can people hear it as well if I play? Okay. 1 second. Let me try again. Okay.
Hello all.
How about now?
Speaking to you from my studio via video. Sadly, I can't make it live.
Can you hear it?
Yeah, I can hear it.
I'm here to talk to you about the Dundee Divest campaign, which was successful in last November. How we're planning to go forward from that, and just my general experiences. So I'm a fourth year fine arts student, and about 1.5 years ago, Ali approached me, one of my lecturers, and asked me if I would be interested to come on board. I didn't know anything about the uni being entangled with the fossil fuel industry via their investment. So when I heard about it, I was quite shocked, and especially shocked at the hypocrisy of like asking people to bring takeaway cups, but investing in fossil fuels and so on and so on. So I was shocked, I was angry, which was a good fuel to to start campaigning. So we set up a petition, or relaunched a petition that some students had made 5 years previously, but which kind of ran low at the time I started campaigning with Ellie. So we relaunched that petition, staged some events. For example, we had a demo outside the building when there was the endowment meeting. And overall, it was a really positive experience, but at the same time, partly it was frustrating because it kept writing emails. And, it was quite tricky sometimes to keep the hopes up when you just don't get any answer. But I found the trick is to just answer to your own email and keep doing that. So, I mean, answer to your own email in a sense that you, make clear that you've sent several messages previously.
Oh, sorry. I don't know what happened there.
At the same time, partly it was frustrating because it kept writing emails. And, it was.
Oh, I have a feeling it's my inefficient Wi-Fi.
Quite tricky sometimes to keep the hopes up.
I'm sorry, Ali. Do you want to start with what you were saying while the video continues to load?
Yeah, sure.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. I thought it was important to give Hannah a chance to explain her experience as a student. So I'm a lecturer. I've been working at the university since 2012, so quite a while. And I first got involved actually in the Divest USS campaign, which is the campaign to get the pension fund to divest. Because basically when I got my job, back in 2012 was the first time I'd had a pension, and I then started to do a little bit of research around that pension and was horrified to find out what my money was being invested in. And it's such like large contributions that are taken off your pay every month, like these huge chunks of money, which, you know, we're told we need to do because it's going to help us to retire eventually and to have an income when we retire. But there's so little information about where that money's going. So I'm still involved in the Divest USS campaign. And yeah, I would recommend all students to research that further, because that's it's not all universities in the UK, but it's the vast majority of them use the USS pension scheme. And cumulatively, it is the biggest pension scheme in the UK in terms of its value, hundreds of billions of pounds. But yeah, and then I, through that divestment campaign, found out more about, you know, what the university itself was doing. And that was largely from actually trying to get the university to back the Divest USS campaign, but they wouldn't back it because they had their own money invested in fossil fuels and all sorts of stuff. So they couldn't really make a stand and say, oh yeah, we're going to demand that our pensions are divested, when they were investing their own endowment in all of these things anyway. So then I sort of just started working locally to try to get the university to divest its endowment. I think it's about £23 million, so it may be similar to Warwick's. I think you said it was a similar amount. And that I began that in 2015, but I was really just sort of doing it whenever I had a moment. And I guess I think one of the guess important things to take from mine and Hannah's contribution here is how important it is for students and staff to work together. Because I think the staff, you know, have the longevity. A lot of them have the longevity in the institution, like they're there for a longer time. But maybe because of that, there isn't so much urgency. So I think when students get involved, and the amount of energy that you guys have already put into researching, like I'm so impressed with your presentation and everything that you've done, kind of puts our campaign to shame. Just the level of kind of research that you've done into where Warwick's money is invested. But then the issue is, with students, is like, how do you keep that culture going in the university when you all graduate and move on? Like, and I haven't found the answer to that yet, because Hannah is about to graduate this summer, and I first approached her because I knew she was involved in XR and was like really quite sort of engaged in quite a lot of activism anyway, and I thought she'd be a good ally. So that's why I approached her. And yes, we, in that year that we worked together, we did get the university to commit to divesting. But the end of what Hannah was going to say was about how they made the statement last November that they were going to divest. Again, they say within 5 years. I don't see why they can't do it immediately. Like, all they need to do is tell the fund managers. I don't see why they can't do it immediately. But the other thing they've said is that they're not going to change their fund manager, and their fund manager is Barclays at the moment. So yeah, obviously probably you'll know how bad Barclays are in terms of funding fossil fuels and all sorts of other horrific stuff as well. So yeah, our campaign is continuing, and I think we'll be taking a lot of tips from you guys in terms of the level of the research that you've done into where the money is, and also, you know, really importantly, making the connections between fossil fuel investment and other human rights abuses, which I think is like fantastic, and I'm really inspired by what you're doing. So thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Ellie, for those contributions. I'll just go back quickly and see if this video is working. Just bear with. Okay, let's attempt it. Let me share screen again.
when you just don't get any answer. But I found the trick is to just answer to your own email and keep doing that. So, I mean,
It's such
Yeah.
a shame, and it was working. I played the video before we sat down, and it was working perfectly. I might put a link to the video in the chat so that people can watch it afterwards. But yeah, so did anybody else want to answer on those questions? How do we pressure our university to divest?
Can I just make one further comment, which I wanted to say before, which is, and I think you're already doing it, but just in terms of calling out the hypocrisy, I think is one of the most important things. And I think that students have so much more powerful voice than staff do, especially within like the marketized higher education system. You're the consumers, and if you complain, then it doesn't make the, doesn't improve the university's ratings and all of those things that they care about. So yeah, absolutely calling out the hypocrisy, exposing it as best you can. And I think, just seeing all of those logos, it's such a powerful image, like to see all of those logos and where all those companies that we know are doing such terrible things that are directly linked to the university. I think you're on the right track with where you're going.
And thank you for the Dundee perspective as well. Asma?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, like, we saw how much resistance you guys faced from like the SU and from the university, just because you even wanted to suggest simply that like students were in favor of divestment. This wasn't even like starting the conversation about actually removing the funds. Like, if the motion passed and if they allowed it to pass, that would have been a completely different battle, like actually getting the university to remove the investments. So like, I think realizing that the university isn't going to just wake up one day and have this like moral conscious awakening about like what its values are. Like, the entire parameter is going to be defined by like mounting student pressure, and it's probably going to have to be through some form of direct action if we want anything to actually happen. It's not going to be through like motions are obviously useful because they're symbolic of like what students want, but that's not how change is actually going to come about. It's going to have to be like grounded in like solidarity between different struggles on campus and like real tangible action.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think that's so important. Melanie? Oh, actually, sorry. I think Imogen had. Hello? Sorry, I don't know if it was my Wi-Fi that cut
Does
out.
Imogen?
I don't mind. Just.
Sorry, my Wi-Fi is cutting out really badly. So either one of you, I'm so sorry.
I don't mind just answering, kind of moving on from that. But I think one of the main things we need to be focusing on is like keeping the pressure up, because I think Warwick's tactic is just to kind of keep putting it on the back burner and just not really touching on it, but they're not really saying anything, and expecting us to just kind of get bored of putting the pressure on and kind of constantly emailing and putting motions and like discussing it and talking about it. And I think they're just hoping we'll get bored of it and that one day we'll just give up because it's just too much like resistance from Warwick. But I think that we need to just continue everything we can, like even if that's just like emails, but putting on social media or these motions and all these meetings and events that are going on, just keep them happening, because the only way that Warwick's going to realise that we're actually in this for the long run and we're not something that's going to keep like going to go away if they just don't like listen to us. Yeah, that's the main thing. Obviously, there are different tactics to how you put the pressure on Warwick, but we need to keep on doing it for as long as we can.
I was just going to add that, oh, sorry.
No, sorry. Melanie, please go.
I was just going to add that having watched Hannah's video, kind of one of the main things that she's talking about in that video is, and really relates to what Imogen was just saying and what others have said, it's just kind of persistence around it. So she just speaks a lot about not giving up, and so keeping that pressure up. And I think that, like a lot of you have said, and it's very true, it's not necessarily that the university is going to have a kind of moral stance and an awakening, but alongside that student pressure, one thing they do also really care about is reputation, and so that's something that you've got on your side. Particularly around areas like hospitals where they have actually made a public statement to got that side, and then as you've said, kind of keep the pressure and let people know what else they're complicit in.
Yeah, thanks, Melanie. I think your audio is cutting out a little bit, but I did grab most of that. Kimia?
Yeah, I just wanted to go along with what Asta was saying before about emphasizing collective direct action. Obviously, me and Asosa have used the SU as like our vehicle for change, but we've faced so much resistance. Our labour has not been appreciated by a student union that also doesn't appreciate divestment at the forefront, nor does care for Palestinian human rights, as we've seen in the occupation before as well. So getting involved in also national student groups such as Apartheid Off Campus and student groups that are really putting BDS and divestment at the forefront is so important. And that's how I imagine collective direct action to work, to get involved in these groups that are directly pressuring our unis and actually using, I guess, more radical ways than putting a motion into a student union that is just exploiting its black and brown student officers. But yeah, that's my personal opinion from working in this SE for this entire year.
Yeah, thanks, Kimia. I completely agree. And I think as well, like the occupation is such a good example of like a collation of societies on campus coming together and what can happen when we do so, like the links that were made between Anti-Racism Society, Pride, FOP, Anti-Sexism Society. These are links that exist to today. And I think it's important to entrench those links and to also expand those, like we've seen like with the Black Student Demands, like bringing in Black cultural societies and stuff like that, because as the theme of this event has like, or this entire week has been trying to show, is that the climate crisis isn't just like an isolated like climate activist issue, it's an anti-capitalist issue, it's an anti-racist, anti-sexist issue. And so on campus, it's really important that we understand that and build those coalitions around that understanding. Yeah. Did anybody else want to add anything on that question? Any other panelists? Okay, so we're moving on to the last question. This is directed towards Invest for Change and Melanie. I actually only encountered Invest for Change over the summer. I think the way that I've been thinking of Invest had always just been like, well, we need to divest, we need to divest. But there's also a conversation that needs to be had of what we do after we invest, and where that money like goes. So the question posed towards Melanie is, what happens after we divest? Yeah, let me share the screen so that we can see the PowerPoint as well.
Great, thank you. I'm going to turn my camera off just because I think it might help with the sound, but if at any point you can't hear me, just let me know. So I think this, the first thing I want to say, which isn't necessarily in this PowerPoint, but is that from the conversations that have already been had and kind of the great things we've heard so far today, I think one of the things that's really important about calling for divestment is thinking about afterwards to make sure that we're holding universities that make big fancy PR statements accountable for those statements and actually doing the work after it. And I guess what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about is a way to do the work after it, which maybe fosters slightly more productive engagement, because it's not just, which is also super important, but maybe is kind of hard to keep up the momentum for, but it's not just kind of, have they done it, have they done it, although it's really important to be doing So if you go to the next slide, this is a visual representation of what Invest for Change, which is a campaign looking at kind of reforming university investments, looks to do. So at COP, they've got commitment to divest from the fossil fuel industry. It's just the fossil industry just because that's been the successful kind of national campaigning, and whether they've done it or not, 85 UK universities have committed to divest from the fossil fuel industry. So the kind of specific look there is just because that's what's kind of been the trend, and it has been the norm, although as we're speaking.
Sorry, Melanie, I think your audio is still cutting out a lot.
Is it any better now?
Not really, even as you were saying that, it was cutting out.
I'm not sure what the best thing to do is, sorry.
That's better, actually. That was better.
Okay, should we try now?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll try. Okay, I'll stay here. I don't know what I've done, but it's going to be working better. Just shout again if it's not.
Okay.
So what I was just saying is that the top line is the kind of starting point, and it's focused there on fossil fuel industries, just because that's what universities have been successfully campaigned on to do. 85 UK universities have committed to divestment. Whether they've done it or not is another story. But that could kind of be divestment in any point, and I'll hopefully talk a bit later about the idea of divestment and engagement being an either-or thing when you're looking at investments, which I don't think is the case. So then we look at impact investment. So that's where the money is after we've called for it to be divested. So say in the perfect world, we were successful in getting Warwick to divest from all of these companies that we don't want them to divest in. They'd have £25 million to invest somewhere else, and we would hope they would invest that in investments that have a real world and measurable impact on the ground. So things like renewable energy infrastructure, which increases access to renewable energy, things like social housing development, which increases access to affordable housing, and things to do with community well-being and kind of investing in local communities. And then we have on the right active engagement, which is I suppose it's putting us in a space where maybe we can't get universities to divest from all corporate companies right now, and so we want them to be actively engaging with those corporate companies. So I think it was Alex who mentioned it before. The HSBC have now committed to phase out coal. Is definitely not enough what they've committed to, but they would never have committed to it without the activists from investors in kind of pressuring them to do that by tabling resolutions, which is like a policy, at their AGM. So that kind of shows where that engagement can happen. And I guess in an ideal world, that engagement only happens kind of in the waiting time before universities have decided to move their money into investments that have only a positive impact. And then underpinning all of that is adopting radical responsible investment policies. So we've spoken about Warwick's investment policy already today, and evidently it's not up to scratch. So this is just some examples of things that should sit in policies to make sure that they are kind of comprehensive. And they make sure that the university is actually accountable for the investments that it makes. So that includes proactive time-bound engagement policies, and an engagement policy really should have an escalation strategy which should end in divestment. So if the demands that the investor has articulated are not met, they should divest from that company. And I think that's a really important use of engagement and divestment together. Although obviously not everyone chooses to engage with companies, which is also a valid kind of route of campaigning. So then the other one is low carbon transition plans. So all corporate companies need to move towards kind of a low carbon plan, need to move towards a low carbon world, and they need a plan to do that, which is kind of measurable and specific. Then there's clearly communicated routes for engagement from the university community. So that's what we've spoken about, kind of students and staff being on boards, and also ways, there's been a lot of talk about like the lack of transparency around investments. And I think it's really important that, the average person in the university community, so a staff member or a student, can clearly see what the university is investing in, and how they can then engage with that. And then finally, a commitment to regular reportings on holdings. So that's the investments that they have, voting and engagement, which is kind of how the university engages with the investments that it has. And that often you may find that if you talk to the university about that, they may have a general report that their investment manager gives. And we want definitely a step further than that. We want kind of real detail in that, rather than just a generic kind of outline of what the investment manager does. I do have a video, but I don't think it's going to work to play. So I think you might, I don't know if you agree with that. So we could just skip past that video one.
Oh, I might just try.
Okay.
Let's just try and see. 1 second.
£15 billion. UK universities currently have over £15 billion of investments. This commonly comes from donated money, known as endowments, which universities can then invest for, most commonly, a financial return. University investments are usually governed by a group of university governors, but operated by a third-party investment manager, meaning the university itself often has little engagement in the detail of the investment and their impact. A lot of this £15 billion is invested in shares in big companies doing little or no public good. But what if this money wasn't used to uphold the status quo? What if we invested in change? What if universities invested in renewable energy infrastructure, or social housing developments and local community projects? What if universities use their influence as investors to push for better corporate practices on issues like the climate crisis, workers' rights, or violations of international law? What if universities committed to investing for good of their students and the world they'll graduate into? Well, why can't they? Let's call on universities to radically reform how they invest their money. Let's call on universities to invest in environmental and social justice solutions, engage with investments to influence a wider corporate change, and adopt radical responsible investment policies that support a sustainable future. Let's get universities' money acting in the interest of students, not against them. Let's invest for change. Join or set up a campaign on your campus now.
Great, thank you, Esosa. So I'm actually gonna not run through the rest of the slides, just because I don't know if we have loads of time, and it's kind of just more detail on that, which I'll put some links in the chat for. But I guess I just wanted to say, Invest for Change is about looking at kind of what we do with the money the university invests, but that's not to kind of take away from the idea that the ideal world, as lots of people have spoken about in this session today, which I fully agree with, is that we don't invest in any of these companies. I suppose some of the stuff we're talking about here in Invest for Change is a realistic look at how we engage with the university, and maybe a first step. So when it's exhausting campaigning against an institution that doesn't kind of give on any of these issues, and so I think it would be I'd be really happy to work with anyone at Warwick, any of you guys who are organising around this, to kind of work out how you start the conversation with the university, maybe talking about some of these first steps, and kind of bring in those divestment demands, which are really important, of course, alongside that. and kind of, I guess, maybe looking at it through a policy route, and getting them to kind of practice what they preach, I guess, because although, as we've spoken about, that policy that they have seems a lot like empty words, it is a public document that's out there, and you can kind of use that reputational argument to really show the hypocrisy there. So yeah, I hope that was kind of informative, and I'll pop some links in the chat, but really happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Melanie. That was the last of the pre-prepared questions. So I think unless anybody else wants to answer on the what do we do after we divest question, sorry, what happens after we divest question, I'm happy to open it up to the audience to ask any questions, a little Q&A session. Asma?
Yeah, I just wanted to share like this really cool example of resistance that I recently found out about, because it's really relevant to all of this. I don't know if anyone's heard of it, but it's called the Lucas Plan, and I think it's really relevant, especially to what we were talking about with like how like certain departments at Warwick, like WMG for example, have joint partnerships with arms companies. So basically, in 1976, a bunch of people who were working for like Lucas Aerospace, they published an alternative plan called the Lucas Plan, and it was like outlining the future of their company. And they basically talked about how their engineering skills and capacities can instead create things that are actually useful for society. And at the time, there was like a big shortage in dialysis machines, so they all collectively just went on strike and decided that they weren't going to manufacture weapons anymore, manufacture aerospace weapons anymore, and that they were going to channel all their energies and all their capacity into manufacturing medical equipment. And I think multiple universities have tried activists at different universities in the UK. I think SOAS has like a Lucas Plan Society where like they try to like, it's kind of like decolonizing the curriculum, but basically like how it's applied. So like instead of like using all that knowledge that you were taught to kind of go and find employability and jobs with like these companies, instead kind of imagining what our education and science can be used for instead. And I think that's like one quite simple, direct way that we can try to reimagine like a different way of like dealing with these like problematic investments and links to these companies on campus.
Thanks, Asma. That's such a good example. Any other questions from the audience, or any questions from the audience?
I wanted to ask, so what do you think, how do you think is the best way to proceed to actually succeed in like making the university agree to divestment?
Hamza?
It's not too different to what Asma mentioned earlier, which is working with other groups and understanding the intersections of our struggles. Working with the Climate Reality in Warwick, for instance, or working with other organizations and groups on campuses to understand how the issue with divestment impacts all of us. And also a reminder that let's not play in the university's playing field. Let's just create our own alternative and reality and really push that forward, because it's us that we're the ones who are going to build the future. It's not the management team. They don't really care. It's us. So we need to reimagine the future and understand what transformation looks like, and that can only happen through grassroots organizing. And this is why it's really important that everyone, especially on campuses, works together and understands how divestment is an issue for all of us. Yeah, that is my answer.
Thank you. Oh, yeah, I suppose it's that.
Yeah, I have a question, if that's okay. So it seems like quite obvious to me that green energy sources like solar and wind are going to be the main way we get our energy in the future. So it seems logical to invest in that now. I'm wondering if anyone can comment on maybe why there is so much pushback, or why organizations like universities are so unwilling to divest from fossil fuels.
Melanie, you want to take this one?
So I guess I would answer in two parts. I'll firstly just tell you what I've heard a lot from universities, which I don't particularly agree with. But basically, the market of renewable energy is not, for them, established enough. So university investments are not there to kind of make ridiculous amounts of money. They're there to get a very regular financial return. And as you can imagine, investing in these very established, huge corporate companies in a purely financial way gives them that regular financial return. And so there's too much risk in these for universities in these renewable energy funds. However, there has been a rise in renewable energy funds. I personally would not. I think there's just, as with a lot of the current things universities are invested in, they don't kind of move us towards a future where we actually have equal access to renewable energy covering kind of the world as we would need it to. So I think that there is a lack of supply of it, kind of, so a lack of like options for universities as they would see it. One thing I didn't talk about in the presentation, but I kind of had a slide on, is about community-owned energy, and I think that's a really great focus for students to be, or staff to be talking to their universities about, looking at investing in it. Kind of links a kind of reputational angle for universities of kind of serving or being a part of their local community, as well as investing in opportunities that's kind of support renewable energy. And so that's when communities buy up local energy, buy up energy infrastructure, like say a wind farm, and then run it, and any profits go back into that community. But yeah, I think the pushback is really that the universities would say a lack of kind of viable options for them. But these are growing, but we need to be really aware of greenwash in this area, because where funds aren't building more renewable infrastructure, where they're just running a renewable infrastructure plant like a wind farm, it's not moving us towards where we need to be.
Thanks, Melanie. I think I would also add, like, on that, in answer to that question, kind of like what Asma was saying earlier, we are in a marketized education model that the primary aim, or university's primary aim with that investment, isn't to do social good, but to make money. And I think, like, we could get down into like a specific critique on capitalism, but it's fundamentally at odds with the sustainable world, with sustainable investments. So yeah. Were there any other panelists that wanted to answer that question, or was there any other questions from the audience? Okay, if there's not any more questions, then I think we can wrap up the event. I want to say a big thank you to all of the panelists that came, that put so much labor and effort, specifically Hamza and Asma. Like, their work trawling through like all of the investments is substantial and so important. But also thank you to all of the other panelists for coming and giving your time and your insight and your knowledge, and we really appreciate it, Kimia and myself. So yeah, we have another Green Week event tomorrow. This time we're looking at BP, which Asma also touched on briefly. I feel like I'm referencing everything that Asma said in this event because she said so much truth. But we've got a BP off-campus event tomorrow where we're looking into BP's archives, the legacies of colonialism on this campus, greenwashing, etc. And yeah, but keep an eye on the SGU's website or our socials for more information on that. And thank you again to all the speakers and everyone who came as well. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much for organising this.
Thank you for the event, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.